Good morning everyone. Bon matin à tout le monde. C'est un plaisir de vous avoir à nouveau pour cette troisième journée et dernière journée de la conférence du CPSC. It's a very pleasure to have you this morning, the last morning of the conference. I am Claire. I'm a volunteer for the CSPC. Je suis bénévole pour le CSPC. And I have the pleasure to introduce the first panel of the day. The panel will talk about the science diplomacy at the service of the major global challenges. Le nom du panel qui va commencer s'appelle La diplomatie au service des grands défis mondiaux. Let me remind you some few information. So if you need any translation, we have a device named Interprefy, so you can scan the QR code on the table to help you to choose the language that you need. Si vous avez besoin d'un service de traduction, vous avez sur les tables des QR codes qui vous permettent de pouvoir avoir accès à un service de traduction. If you didn't see yet the super magazine from the CSPC, please use it. It's free, it's for you, and it's made with love from the volunteers and all the people that gives their word inside. So take some souvenir from the conference. And finally, just enjoy the discussion. Laurent, it's yours. Yes.
Bonjour tout le monde. Good morning. Ça va être un panel bilingue. Je vais surtout parler en français, mais mes invités parlent parfois en anglais, parfois en français. Donc voilà. On va essayer de suivre. Bienvenue tout le monde à ce panel sur la diplomatie scientifique au service des grands défis mondiaux. Je m'appelle Laurent Corbeil, je suis conseiller stratégique au Fonds de recherche du Québec et je suis accompagné de Pony Magoul, professeur en génie géologique à Polytechnique, oui, et de Annalena Rouland, professeure en diplomatie scientifique de l'École supérieure d'études internationales de l'Université Laval. Deux titulaires de nos chaires en diplomatie scientifique au Fonds de recherche du Québec. Je voulais commencer un peu par parler pourquoi la diplomatie scientifique au Fonds de recherche du Québec. C'est une initiative qui a commencé lentement dans la tête de Rémi Quirion. Déjà en 2017, il y avait un forum au Québec sur la diplomatie scientifique, un petit rapport qui a été fait. Et par la suite, une des premières initiatives qu'on a faites, c'est de mettre en place un programme de scientifiques en résidence dans les représentations du Québec à l'étranger. Ça a commencé lentement en 2018 avec 2 postes. Bon, ensuite, il y a eu la pandémie, on a ralenti un peu. Mais cette année, on a mis l'accélérateur. Maintenant, on est à 13 scientifiques en résidence dans les représentations du Québec à l'étranger. Bientôt 14. Peut-être 15 l'année prochaine. Donc, on essaie vraiment d'augmenter le nombre. Ce sont des personnes qui ont un doctorat et en fait, c'est une bourse postdoctorale qu'ils obtiennent de 2 ans pour aller travailler dans une représentation à l'étranger. Donc, faire de la diplomatie scientifique, entre autres, faire rayonner la recherche du Québec, le milieu scientifique du Québec à l'étranger, apprendre à connaître l'écosystème du territoire où ils sont, et essayer de faire du maillage et parfois d'aligner les priorités des différents pays avec nos priorités québécoises en recherche. Donc, un gros travail qu'ils font à l'étranger. Mais une autre initiative qu'on a un peu plus récente sont les chaires en diplomatie scientifique. Donc, c'est un programme qu'on a lancé en janvier de cette année, en 2025. Et donc, on a annoncé récemment la création de 8 chaires en diplomatie scientifique. Pour vous donner une idée, on a une première chaire en collaboration Université Laval-Sorbonne, dont Annalena est titulaire, qui est vraiment sur la diplomatie scientifique en tant que telle. Et ensuite, les 7 autres ont des thématiques. Donc, celle de Pony est sur l'Arctique et l'espace. On en a une sur la sécurité alimentaire, qui est une chaire entre l'Université McGill et des partenaires en Afrique, entre autres. On en a une sur la gouvernance mondiale de l'intelligence artificielle. On en a une sur la gestion des stocks halieutiques en océanographie, donc avec l'Université du Québec à Rimouski et le Japon. On en a une à Trois-Rivières, l'Université du Québec à Trois-Rivières, sur l'éducation de la petite enfance, collaboration Québec-Colombie, Afrique. Une autre sur la diplomatie scientifique autochtone, donc comment la science peut influer dans les négociations sur les grandes ententes sur les peuples autochtones et comment les peuples autochtones intègrent ces négociations. Donc, une variété ici là, de thèmes qui sont couverts par ces chaires. Mais avant de commencer la discussion, on a Rémi Quirion, scientifique en chef du Québec, donc qui veut vous adresser un mot par vidéo. Malheureusement, il était ici plus tôt cette semaine, mais il a dû quitter hier, et donc il va s'adresser à nous par vidéo.
Bonjour, mon nom est Rémi Quirion, scientifique en chef du Québec et PDG du Fonds de recherche du Québec. Désolé de ne pas être avec vous en personne aujourd'hui pour cette session sur la diplomatie scientifique, un sujet de grand intérêt pour nous au Québec et en particulier pour les fonds de recherche du Québec et mon bureau à titre de scientifique en chef. La science n'a pas de frontières, ne devrait pas avoir de frontières. La science ouvre des portes, les portes de la connaissance. On l'a vu beaucoup pendant la pandémie de la COVID, où là, vraiment, les collègues de partout dans le monde ont travaillé ensemble. Et ça a permis de développer très rapidement des vaccins à l'ARN contre la COVID. On le voit aussi dans le secteur de l'intelligence artificielle, la gouvernance de l'intelligence artificielle. Et bien sûr, les changements climatiques, on doit travailler tous ensemble. Mais depuis quelque temps, il y a différentes attaques contre la science, on met des barrières, c'est le multilatéral est de plus en plus difficile, de collaboration entre pays plus difficile, c'est dommage. On doit garder en tête le modèle, par exemple, de l'accélérateur des particules à Genève, le CERN. On peut penser aussi à la station spatiale, où il y a encore beaucoup de collaboration entre les équipes, par exemple, américaines et russes. On peut penser aux grands télescopes un peu partout dans le monde. Ceci étant dit, comme je l'ai mentionné, il y a des attaques contre la science depuis un certain temps, contre les scientifiques, contre les universités. Donc, nous, on s'est dit au Fonds de recherche du Québec, qu'est-ce qu'on peut faire? On a décidé de créer un réseau de chaires en diplomatie scientifique. 2 des titulaires sont avec vous aujourd'hui. Donc, on crée un réseau de chaires. C'est le plus grand réseau de chaires en diplomatie scientifique dans le monde. C'est pas rien. On veut en faire encore davantage. Les 8 chaires, déjà, les liens sont créés avec 13 pays un peu partout dans le monde. Et c'est pas la seule activité qu'on a fait au cours des dernières années. Oui, les chaires, mais aussi un programme de scientifiques en résidence dans les bureaux du Québec à l'étranger. On en a près d'une quinzaine. Donc, nos chaires, en plus des scientifiques en résidence, ça nous crée un réseau important pour valoriser la science un peu partout dans le monde, valoriser la diplomatie scientifique. Pourquoi un réseau de chaires au Québec? Les défis sont énormes partout dans le monde. La géopolitique est très compliquée. Donc, une chaire, 2 chaires, c'est probablement pas suffisant. Et on doit aussi se spécialiser dans différents secteurs de diplomatie scientifique. Donc, le réseau actuel que l'on crée va cibler différentes thématiques, comme par exemple la sécurité alimentaire, l'Arctique, la gouvernance de l'intelligence artificielle, les changements climatiques et plusieurs autres. Donc, j'espère que dans le temps, au cours des prochaines années, les collègues titulaires des chaires vont développer des formations dans leur secteur et vont travailler en réseau avec les autres chaires ici au Québec et, comme je l'ai mentionné, avec aussi les scientifiques en résidence un peu partout dans le monde. Objectif de ces chaires-là, certainement la formation de la relève, donc avoir la prochaine génération de jeunes qui sont intéressés, oui, par la science, mais aussi par la diplomatie scientifique. Donc, avec nos chaires, on espère faciliter la formation en diplomatie scientifique dans différents secteurs. Aussi, on compte beaucoup sur les chaires pour travailler avec nous, pour contrer la désinformation et les fausses nouvelles. On veut aussi qu'il travaille étroitement avec notre réseau international en conseil scientifique, INSA. Donc, le conseil scientifique mène souvent à la diplomatie scientifique. Donc, on veut vraiment que ces deux organisations-là, deux regroupements-là, travaillent très étroitement ensemble. En terminant, peut-être le prochain défi, c'est de la diplomatie scientifique inclusive, c'est de la diplomatie scientifique, je dirais, citoyenne. Donc, comment amener la diplomatie scientifique d'un niveau international, national ou régional, de plus en plus à un niveau local, avec nos gouvernements de proximité dans nos municipalités, dans nos villes. Donc, comment amener le citoyen à travailler davantage avec nos scientifiques dans le cadre de chaires en diplomatie scientifique? C'est le prochain défi que j'aimerais soumettre aux titulaires de chaires en diplomatie scientifique. Je vous souhaite une très, très bonne séance, très bonne session, beaucoup d'échanges, beaucoup de questions et on a bien hâte de vous d'entendre la suite. Qu'est-ce que vous pensez faire au cours des prochaines années? Bon colloque.
Bon, parfait. Ben, merci à Rémi Quirion. Je vais commencer avec mes questions tout de suite. Je vais commencer avec Anna-Lena. Donc, j'aimerais ça, Anna-Lena, étant donné que tu travailles directement sur la théorie de la diplomatie scientifique, est-ce que tu peux nous définir un peu c'est quoi les grandes lignes, les grands contours?
Oui, bonjour et merci pour m'avoir invité. Je suis vraiment ravie d'être ici. Je vais répondre en anglais tout d'abord parce que ça concerne vraiment mes recherches et c'est encore un peu plus difficile pour moi d'expliquer en français. Je viens d'arriver au Québec il y a 6 semaines. Donc, I think this question really goes to the heart of what science diplomacy is about. And I'm currently preparing my course on science diplomacy, and one of the key points that I want my students to take away is that depending on who you're talking to, you will get different definitions of what science diplomacy is. Obviously, I'm oversimplifying here, but we can distinguish between 2 different types of definitions of science diplomacy, one coming more from the practitioner side. So, for example, scientists that turn to policymaking or are now involved in policymaking. And one of the prototype definitions that we have comes from the Royal Society and AAAS. They have changed it, and I think we will speak about this a bit later. But from an analytical point of view, this definition is suboptimal. There's a bit of overlap between the 3 definitions that we have. So that's first science in diplomacy, so using scientific advice to inform international negotiations. The second dimension that is mentioned here is diplomacy for science, where diplomats and policymakers are facilitating international collaboration, specifically in these big science endeavors that can't be financed by one state alone. And the final dimension is science for diplomacy, where science is helping to improve international relations, specifically in contexts where we do see political tensions. And then there's a range of definitions that were coined by researchers, some of my colleagues, for example, Tim Flink and Uli Schreiterer, pretty much after the Royal Society and AAAS definition came out, defined science diplomacy as science being a tool to access researchers' infrastructures abroad, to promote international collaboration in science and technology, and then also to influence on the one hand audiences abroad, policy making. So these are 3 dimensions that my colleagues have or that they distinguish. And one of the aims of that I see for my chair is really to help sharpen these conceptual definitions, contribute theoretically to how we understand, how we frame science diplomacy, because so far there's so much going on in terms of definitions in the science diplomacy sphere that I think we do need a bit of work here.
Thank you. So, complex concept. What brought you to study science diplomacy, and with whom are you working?
Oui, excellente question. Je vais répondre en français parce que ça, c'est un peu plus facile à expliquer en français. Donc, j'ai commencé à m'intéresser à la diplomatie scientifique quand j'ai commencé ma maîtrise à Berlin. À l'époque, il y avait une position comme auxiliaire des recherches dans un projet en diplomatie scientifique qui était financé par l'Union européenne. C'était le projet ELSIT et donc j'ai postulé pour cette position. Malheureusement, je n'ai pas obtenu le boulot, mais j'étais encore intéressée à la diplomatie scientifique et donc j'ai décidé d'écrire mon mémoire sur le sujet. Et oui, comme on dit en anglais, the rest is history. I'm here today. It's a long story, so to say.
Thank you. Pony, est-ce que tu pourrais nous décrire un peu ta chaire de recherche, comment tu l'as conceptualisée, avec qui tu travailles aussi, comment ça va fonctionner, tout ça?
Ça marche. Merci beaucoup. What we are going to do is to make an analog between the Arctic, the North, and space. What I call extreme environment. I've been working on these topics since I started my academic career as a professor, independent researcher. And since 2019, when I saw NASA's program, Artemis program, we're going to the moon, this time to stay. I was so excited, like a little girl, we're going to the moon. Oh my goodness, how it can be possible? And not just going to the moon, but this time to stay. And I went through the program, I read a lot, and I figured out one of the things that they are looking for is water ice on the moon. And at that time, I had very active research. We were, I think, disclosing an invention on how we can characterize permafrost soils on Earth. And it was about, the characterizing how much liquid water we have, how much ice we have, because these elements have a real impact on mechanical characteristics of permafrost and infrastructure, northern infrastructure, climate change, etc. Then I started working on this topic. I started writing proposal for the Canadian Space Agency. The first ones got rejected, of course, but I just insisted, and finally it worked. So I started working on this topic, both Arctic and space, and other projects, just came. Not just came, we worked hard to make them happen. But for example, what is the role of afforestation in the north on carbon sequestration? Because of permafrost degradation, we have greenhouse gas emissions, and there are many, many questions we do not know. And to be honest with you, it started I was worried. What will happen the next 10 years, 20 years with all the, scientific issues we have, not about geopolitical things. That geopolitics, is quite recent. And the same thing on the moon, it's technology race. We are looking for water ice. NASA, after 50, 60 years, they are not still there. And with that administration change, I hope that they keep working hard as before. And China is working hard. Other countries, India, sent a few landers on the moon. And NASA is not there yet. And it's a technology race. If we can find water ice on the moon, what we call it lunar mining, I know that it can be like people, the public, it's not a good term, but lunar mining is just finding in situ resources for construction, for permanent presence on the moon, because we want to be independent from the terrestrial resources. So just imagine the first country that have that technology readiness level that can go and find resources they are looking for. And what would be the impact on all the mining terrestrial critical minerals in geopolitical, the important regions? I was really worried. I became a lunar advocate. Started giving talk across the world just to bring, just talk about the issues we may have. In February, I saw the other thing. It was on energy transition in the north. For example, how we can deploy small modular reactors. These are the new generation of nuclear power plants that the government of Canada invested, and they want to, deploy such critical infrastructure in the north. And we have no idea how we can deploy them technically. But if we can resolve the technical issues, again, we have all these, the community, the related concerns. Do they accept, the such critical infrastructure that nowhere on Earth it has been deployed? I saw in February the call from the Fonds de Recherche de Québec. To be honest with you, the term was a bit shocking. Science diplomacy, what is it? So I went through all the description, and so wow, it's exactly what we are doing: knowledge mobilization, technology transfer, and all of these things. That's just Eureka moment for me in my career.
So, was it the first time you heard the term science diplomacy per se, or you had heard of it before?
Maybe I heard it before, but it never got my attention. To me, it was a very, very niche term. It was for lawyers and diplomats and science diplomacy. It was just something that I never took it seriously in my own career.
Yeah, but you were already doing the
yeah,
work.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and just to finish, what's your team? With whom are you working on this chair?
Yes, I'm really honored to work with an exciting and excellent team with Dr. Paul Berkman from Science Diplomacy, the Center in Boston, with Philippe Arcais at Université Paris-Saclay in Paris, and also Miriam Axel from the United Nations University.
Thank you.
And many other partners internationally.
Yeah. Ça, c'est un très bon exemple d'un thème qui regroupe plusieurs autres thèmes. Tu as mentionné les mines, le territoire, le changement climatique, etc. Donc, ça comprend beaucoup de choses. Anne-Helena, tu as fait beaucoup de recherches sur la diplomatie scientifique. Est-ce que tu pourrais nous parler un peu des grandes tendances? Quels sont les grands enjeux qu'on voit apparaître?
Yeah, sure. And I think I forgot to answer part of your question. So my chair is working, and you've mentioned this already, with Sorbonne University in France. But I also have an extensive network from a time when I was doing my postdoc and my PhD in Europe. So I'm working with Oxford University, for example, with colleagues in Stockholm, in the Netherlands, in Delft, CBS Copenhagen. We have a collaboration ongoing at the moment, but also outside of Europe, I'm working with Singapore, researchers in Singapore and in Brazil. So I'm really, one of the objectives I see for the chairs as well, to build up a network, and a truly international network of people that are working on science diplomacy more from an empirical and theoretical perspective. And now coming back to the trends that we're currently seeing in the literature, that ties in really well with a project that I've recently completed with some colleagues in the Netherlands and Brazil and the UK. So we've been doing a bibliometric study of the science diplomacy literature of the past 20 years. So because the concept is so new, there's actually not that much literature. And I think your reaction, is quite telling. I think a lot of people don't know about the concept, what it is about. Even researchers to this day are not entirely sure what it is and what we can do with it. But we were looking in our study at who's writing about science diplomacy, where are these authors based, and what are they writing about? Which countries and specifically are they focusing on when they speak about science diplomacy? And what we found was that there's a big interest in the US in science diplomacy, which I think is not too surprising. The AAAS is based in the US, so it's natural that the actors that coined the term of science diplomacy also continue to be active to this day. We also see quite a bit of interest in Russia as a science diplomacy area, as well as Europe. That's also not too surprising, because we had several EU-funded projects on the topic of science diplomacy, so there was quite a bit of scholarship that came out of these projects. Canada, in comparison, didn't feature that prominently in the literature. So I think that's also something I would like to tackle, looking more at what is the approach of Canada to science diplomacy, what's going on. And I think this chair program is a great initiative to get this type of work started. So yeah, I think these are some of the geographic patterns that we see. And then obviously, given the current geopolitical situation, a big topic is security in international research collaborations, national interests in international research collaborations, and then sovereignty. We've also heard these themes on several occasions at this conference. And this is another one of my interests. I'm specifically interested in the intersection of science diplomacy and research security. So how can we keep international research collaborations open while protecting national interests and key technologies? How can we conceptualize the relationship between science diplomacy and research security? Both are really new concepts, so I'm quite excited about this space and contributing to understanding both concepts.
Merci. Pouni, quel avantage est-ce que tu vois à travailler au sein d'une chaire comme celle soutenue par le FRQ? Quel avantage tu vois à travailler au sein d'un réseau qui est déjà international? Hein? Toutes les chaires qui ont été proposées sont dès le départ internationales. Et d'autres chaires en diplomatie scientifique. Parce que ce qu'on n'a pas dit encore, c'est qu'on va mettre ces 8 chaires-là en réseau, on va les faire travailler ensemble.
Yeah, the nature of interdisciplinary research, you know, in my technical projects, I've been working with I don't know how many countries and how many researchers from different fields. So for technology transfer, for knowledge mobilization, all these, you know, the activities we want to do with the government. I'm a civil engineer by training. No one is perfect. I need, you know, complementary expertise to be able to get the job done and also learn. I told you yesterday, I will be the first student in that, you know, science diplomacy chair. Yeah, networking and interdisciplinary work, we cannot solve big problems in the world alone.
No,
yeah.
Of course. Thank you. Et Anna-Lena, à qui peuvent servir les recherches en diplomatie scientifique, celles des 8 chaires en fait? Comment tu vois ça se déployer?
Yeah, it's a great question and one that I get asked on a regular basis. I might be a bit biased because science diplomacy is my research interest. But I think science diplomacy research, if done properly in terms of like solid empirical evidence and theoretically back, can really benefit practitioners and policymakers. So far, a lot of the initiatives and policies on science diplomacy are not necessarily backed by solid empirical evidence. Some of the claims that we hear at times and again about science diplomacy may sound very promising and nice, but we actually don't know from an empirical perspective whether they hold in practice. So I think it's important to do more empirical research to either demystify these claims or to back them up. So that's more of the policy and practitioner side. But then I also think it will benefit the scientific community and researchers at large, specifically the type of research that I envision on research security and science diplomacy. I think this can really help researchers to navigate this increasingly complex international context in which they are conducting their research, help them to identify trustworthy partners, how to navigate openness and security in international research collaboration. So these are the two main audiences that I see for my type of research going forward.
Merci. Une dimension qu'on n'a pas encore couvert, c'est les politiques mondiales, politique internationale, la diplomatie en tant que telle. Pouni, quels sont tes espoirs de contribuer à certaines politiques internationales? Est-ce que vous prévoyez vous tourner vers certaines instances, certaines organisations internationales?
Two big events that we mentioned in our proposal, and you know the goal of our chair is to prepare, you know, the Quebec and our international partners for that is International Polar Year. which will be in 6 years. 5 years, we are already in 2026. And the other thing, which will be in 2032, 33, I think. And the other big event is United Nations Space, the conference, which will be in 2027 or 2028. So we already have our milestones and what we want to do. And all our activities will be around that with our international network. Did I answer your question? Or you forgot?
Yes, of course. Yes, thank you. And I don't know, Anna-Lena, if I can ask you the same question. I did not send you that question beforehand, but...
Yeah, it's a good question. So if I'm going beyond the academic communities or conference that I would like to contribute to, I think one of the objectives that I see for my chair is really to engage, to have meaningful engagement with the policy community and the practitioner community that's working on science diplomacy, because whether we like it or not, it's a very policy-oriented field. So I think it's important to have meaningful interactions, because on the one hand, and I'm returning to a point that I made earlier, it's important for policymakers to see empirical evidence that can support their policies or maybe adjust them. But on the other hand, it's also important for researchers to interact with policymakers, because that way we know what are the actual real world needs, like what kind of research do you need in this area. So I really want to organize formats where we can bring the community as a whole together, so policymakers, practitioners, and researchers, to have cross-fertilization across these communities, which do tend to be a bit siloed at times. And that can be either on the local, national, or international level. So I will be attending, for example, the European Science Diplomacy Conference that's upcoming in Denmark in December, and I'm hoping here to connect with international colleagues and to get an idea of like what's needed at the international level. How can we support science diplomacy initiatives at the international level?
Parfait. Merci beaucoup. Merci beaucoup à vous deux d'avoir répondu à mes questions. Maintenant, je vais me tourner vers le public. Si vous avez des questions, ça va nous faire plaisir d'y répondre. Does anybody have any question? Maybe I have a question for the audience. Oh, there's somebody. Oh, okay.
Thank you very much. Once upon a time, I had a dream of being a diplomat. So, having said that, it seems to me that diplomacy is very much about state interest. And so I am curious to challenge a little bit to ask whether we are truly talking about something beyond researchers, scientists having international collaborations. So that would be one question. And the other, if I may, is it easier to bring scientists into the diplomatic realm or to bring the diplomats into the scientific realm?
Two good questions.
Okay, so you're looking at me, so I will take up those questions. Excellent questions. I will start off with the second part of your question. I think either way, it's difficult to bring these two communities together because, and that's been mentioned in the first report on science diplomacy, diplomats have a very specific skill set that scientists don't necessarily have, and vice versa, right? Personally, I would say it might be easier to turn a scientist into a diplomat than the other way around, just because it takes years and years of studying and training to gain that in-depth knowledge of a research or scientific area. Don't want to say that as a diplomat you don't need years of training, but I would say the soft skills and the relational skills that you need as a diplomat may be easier to acquire on top of your research training, but I would say don't underestimate the effort you need to put into that. And your first question, as I understood it, so there's a lot of focus on state interests, national interests. What can we do beyond that? And actually, the current science diplomacy literature is paying quite a bit of attention to non-state actors, so non-for-profits, international organizations like UNESCO, their role in promoting science diplomacy. So I think there is a role for these non-state actors, but especially in the current geopolitical climate, I think they will have a hard time to engage in science diplomacy because increasingly we're seeing national interest really being pushed and being prioritized. But at the same time, this calls, I think, specifically for non-state actors to become active to provide a counterweight to this current tendency.
If I can add something, you know, when you ask your question, the first thing that comes to my mind is I work in an engineering university around, you know, the engineers and mostly engineers, even not scientists. And the first thing that came to my mind is that sometimes, believe me, it's much harder to negotiate and talk to your next door colleagues than talking to someone with a degree in philosophy or literature. And I totally agree with you that soft skill matters a lot. And one thing that I wish at the end of this, you know, the 5-year program we can achieve is to teach negotiation skills to engineering students. If we can do that, I think it's very good.
And if I may add from the FRQ's point of view, sure, so we represent the research part of things. So we're bringing mostly scientists into the science diplomacy. But I already mentioned we want them to work in a network. So we're going to organize events. So the first of which will be the reunion of the 8 chairs in March. But what we want to do also is bring the diplomats to them. So it's not all done yet. We're still working on it, but we're planning on inviting all the consulates who are in the province of Quebec to this event, for example, so that they know who is working on science diplomacy, and we're working on other initiatives to bring the two together.
Okay, I'm sorry. Hello, my name is Urs Obrist. I'm a Senior Science and Technology Counselor at the Embassy of Switzerland here in Ottawa. I would a little bit beg to differ in terms of the role of science diplomacy writ large in diplomacy. If you look at the example of Switzerland, 20 years ago, we would invite maybe a yodel choir or some cultural group. We're moving away from that. It's really the notion science diplomacy is a key element of diplomacy nowadays. So yes, it's important to bring the scientists into the conversation, but at the same time, I think the diplomats themselves are also very keen on actually getting into the conversation, and that really pertains to the question of research security as it applies nowadays in this political context. As you will know, Geneva, as has been mentioned by Rémi Quirion, is doing a lot when it comes to science diplomacy anticipation. What do you foresee in the next 10 or 15 years as the key challenge for you as science diplomacy practitioners or a student, if I may say so?
To me, it's execution. I mean, going beyond the theory and try to, my dream is to be part of an international deal through my science. And I think even in engineering, that execution is the hardest part.
Thank you for your intervention. I totally agree. Yeah, by definition, diplomats will be part of science diplomacy, right? I mean, that's the core business of their job. I think it's less intuitive to have scientists in the diplomacy sphere, and I think that's kind of what's the intriguing bit about science diplomacy to begin with, and I think that's part of the charm of it and why it's gotten so popular. Because when I started working on it 8 years ago, people would look at me and be like, "So, yeah, what are you actually doing? What is science diplomacy?" And when I look at the past 2 days here at the conference, it seems like everyone has a pretty good idea of what science diplomacy is, and there's a lot happening in Canada, which is not necessarily the case everywhere else in Europe. But now coming to your question about the main challenge that I see for myself as a science diplomacy scholar is making sure that the concept of science diplomacy is not completely diluted, because I did have several encounters with, for example, research administrators that told me, I don't like to use that concept. I don't like to use that term because it means anything and nothing. I don't know how to implement it, how to deal with it, because it's a lot of lofty words, but there's no substance. So I do think we need to make sure that there is substance beyond those words.
Thank you.
Gianmarco, I'm sorry, I'm told we have to stop, but maybe you can come and see us afterwards. I think there's another panel starting in 3 minutes.
Very much for this very interesting discussion. Yeah, I wanted to hear the other question, but we are really running on time. So thank you very much for joining, and thank you for the FRQ for organizing this panel.
Well, thank you to CSPC for having us.